All right. Everyone here that wants to be here, I guess. Y'all doing good. Still holding on pretty strong. The talking after lunch is always a little bit tricky because everyone's trying to digest and fight off naps, which is why I'm drinking Starbucks coffee. So we are going to talk a little bit first. My name is Bryan. I'm neither a grower or a scientist. I am in the restaurant business. But we do handle quite a lot of your product. We buy a lot of stuff from, several people that I see out there right now. So we are in a pretty unique position to tell you what works and what doesn't, and we appreciate you guys bearing with us and not taking it personally when we do have to give you feedback that isn't necessarily what you want to hear. But we want you guys to succeed, and I assume that you want our restaurants to succeed too, so you have a place to send your stuff and pay for your gas. But that leads me to the interesting subject of bad oysters, and I don't mean bad as in like they smell. I mean bad as in like everybody I think grows stuff that maybe is suboptimal. At least I think. 2 weekends ago at the Panacea Oyster Festival, I was helping out Kane and Greg, and I was telling Kanan and Lane Zerlot about this panel because I knew they wouldn't be here, and I wanted them to kind of just like give me some feedback. And I said, Lane, it's about like oysters that are not perfect. What are we gonna do? What are you gonna do with your oysters that don't end up the way you wanted them to? And that son of a bitch says, why ain't the oysters perfect? So there's several really good reasons why most of anybody that's a human being has oysters that are maybe not exactly what they wanted. I think obviously the first one is time. There's a lot of you guys out there that are, that have other full-time jobs to subsidize the passion of farming. And the fact that you have other stuff that you must do to produce income means that sometimes you're pulled away from your lease more than you'd like to be. There's also, time and money are very closely related. And I mean, as we are kind of like getting ready to try this farming process, there's a lot of costs out there. And some of the stuff that you want, some of these toys, you can't just have them just because you want them. You gotta earn a little bit. You gotta pay down some debt, and then you get them when you can afford to get them. So, gosh, hand sorting, that's time consuming. Hand grading, I mean, that stuff, that can beat you up from a clock perspective. So I know that those sorts of things have to be things that would produce some variability in oysters in general. Obviously, we've talked a lot about summer weather and what that can do to your oysters in terms of like their growth rates, the speed at which they are maturing, and also how much time are you separated from your babies because the weather just kicked you in the teeth again. I mean, one of the things that Garrett at Boondocks can probably attest to is, how when you guys got handed Michael, I mean, how long did you have to stay away from your stuff? And before you even jump into it, I mean, I noticed when we first started getting Florida oysters at Kimball House, there was some really beautiful stuff, and it was only for about 8 weeks before that storm happened, and everybody's oysters changed. And it wasn't because they wanted to; it's just because that's what happened. So, I mean, how much time was it before you were able to get back out there?
From Hurricane Michael, number one, keep our boat in a hangar with a hydraulic door, so we had no power for 5 days. So we couldn't even get out for 5 days. And then it was just clean up the mess. Oh man, it was a mess. At first we thought all our SEPA gear handled the storm just fine. Our floating oyster go bags with the 2 floats on them, they were gone. They were in the woods. The lines were snapped, wrapped around all kinds of stuff. And the cleanup started. And when the cleanup started, that's when we really realized we lost 70% of what we had planted in 17. We lost 80% of what we planted in 18. So it was very hard hit. But yeah, then the cleanup happened, and man, the oysters got gnarly after that. There was a huge spat set that happened that was associated with the storm, and we had it. It wasn't until March or April of the next year from October 6th. It was until March or April before we finally felt like we had recovered. But not financially, but just on the lease, just getting things cleaned up to where the lease is actually functional and we're actually moving forward again.
Okay. So, anyways, see these things happen. It doesn't take a lot. It can be a more minor hiccup than that, I think, even to cause some disruption on a lease, which may cause some percentage of your product to be altered. So, what I know that we try to do at our restaurants, and I know that Julia from Henrietta Red, who's right here. What we've talked a little bit about today is like what do we do with this product, and like what are our concerns from a price perspective, and what are the farmers' concerns from a price perspective. But we want farmers to know that we've essentially got you covered, and if your stuff ends up like hanging a left turn, it's not trash. We'll figure it out. But we got to figure out how to work together directly and work together with guys like Tim, who has the processing facility. But yeah, I think we also can kind of like cut up a little bit and talk about, just some creative stuff to do with oysters that are maybe not as fit for the raw bar as they might have once been. So the gentleman number 2 in is Connor McNair from NC. Connor, you mentioned that maybe there's a colorful term for the oysters on your lease that don't.
We call them donkey dicks or banana dangs, just like something fun. You got them, so you might as well have a little bit of fun with it. But really, I think it's just acknowledging that we all have that problem. Like, we all want to grow a perfect oyster, and we all have, I feel like, something pretty similar in mind when it comes to that. But we're in the South. Things grow quickly. Hurricanes happen. So, like, trying to fight that constantly is just, that's the name of the game.
Do you have can you throw an estimate at just like what percentage of your stuff is maybe like, all right, I'm not going to grade this as Dukes or Divine Pine?
After Florence, it was like half.
Okay.
Right now, I think it's probably a little bit under 10%.
Okay.
And like, just to hopefully get on to another question, like, we go to the farmer's market in our area, and we have a lot of people that love traditional steam oysters, and I market them for that. And it gives me the ability to charge a little bit less, not a significant amount less, but a little bit less, and then talk about, why this cultivated oyster is so much better. And I mean, end all be all, compared to the wild product, they're going to get so much more meat to shell and everything like that. They don't care about what it looks like on the outside.
Fair enough. On the end is Chef Jake Carey from Pinpoint Restaurant right here in Wilmington. Just give me your take. Do you have a person who is a good source for oysters that or maybe not raw bar potential that you can use for cooked preparations or dinner preparations? And throw a couple of ideas out there that give people some sort of creative input into what they can do at home or what they can suggest for other people that are buying their stuff that doesn't look great or is a B grade.
For the most part, all the oyster farmers around here right now bring in really high quality stuff to me. So it happens very rarely, but I've sort of started using a little bit larger, oversized oysters, actually diver oysters. So they're wild, diving down like 6 feet. They're getting them up and sort of treat them totally different, almost like a piece of meat. I'm taking them out, shucking them, drying them pretty well, and then sort of searing them like you would a steak or a piece of foie gras, or just a very hard sear one side, flip it, and it cuts like a piece of meat, or say like a rendered piece of fat on a ribeye. Yeah. So it's a good time to get creative. If you have older oysters you need to shuck, always fries good. We're doing a baked oyster right now with pork belly, pepper jelly, cornbread, and then a buttermilk herb dressing on top of it. So it's pretty southern. Also, we're doing sort of using those diver oysters we're sort of pan searing it like I was talking about and putting it into like a Chinese scallion pancake.
Oh, cool.
So there's multiple different uses, and it definitely keeps me getting creative, being able to do that.
Gotcha. If you don't mind me asking, for that wild oyster? Do you have a cost that you could?
I think they're definitely less than farm raised. It's probably around 40 cents an oyster.
Okay.
But they are singles, so
Right.
singles, very uniform, big guys, meaty.
Okay, cool. Julia, talk to me. How often do you have dishes where you seek out oysters that are either bigger and less expensive, or do you have an outlet for suboptimal graded oysters? And give us a little insight as to what you guys do with them.
We do. We have a menu that we try to change dishes fairly often, depending on the season. So if it's spring and summer where there's a lot of new produce on the menu, we'll change about a dish a week. But then we have other dishes that have been on our menu since we've opened, like 2 different kinds of roasted oysters and a oyster sandwich on our bar menu. And part of the reason why is if we get something in that isn't necessarily efficient to serve on the raw bar, we can use it for those applications. Or the guys at the raw bar, if they're having a problem with shells breaking, they can put the oysters into a deli and pass them to the fry station instead of just putting them in the trash. So we tend to, there's times for sure where we don't have any problematic products in-house. We keep those items on all the time. But there's other things we've added as we've gone. We've had a really popular oyster fritter that is, I think, probably similar to a pancake batter where we're just folding it in and then frying it. We've also done a back to life cocktail type item where we take trim from our snapper, oysters that we can't sell at the raw bar, bits and pieces of things, and marinate it in like a lime juice and then put it in a tomato sauce for a raw seafood kind of cocktail thing.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, okay, so the follow-up to that then obviously would be, everybody on both sides, we're all on the same side, but you guys have to make X amount of cents per oyster or X amount of dollars per bag to make it worth your while to do this. Same token here, restaurants are, people think that we're rich, but it costs a lot to run these damn things. So what would you say is roughly what's a good price point per oyster for utilization of if you were going to intentionally use something that was maybe a farmed B grade oyster, what would you be shooting for in terms of price per oyster?
Well, we have a pretty wide range on the menu. I think our least expensive Gulf oyster is about 67 cents a piece, and then that's all the way up to things we're getting from Washington State or New England that once you factor in shipping can be over $1.45 a piece. And we want to do that, of course, to have that range for the consumer. We're in Nashville, so it's not just all. I think there was a time where it would have been mostly people who vacation in Apalachicola, and they're very happy to get a Gulf oyster, no matter what size it is or what it looks like. And now we have so many tourists coming through and so many transient residents that they really want to see all different kinds. So it's worth it for us to bring in the very expensive ones, but we have to balance that out with a lot of less expensive product. So ideally, if we're just using it for wood roasted or using it for fried applications, I try to not use anything that's more than about 85 cents a piece. But we also find that Gulf oysters are really great for frying. Where I don't like a fried West Coast oyster, so in some sense it just makes sense. The regional cuisines kind of play into the type of oyster we're getting already.
This summer we were actually, and this is just maybe something that you can suggest for anybody, but we were at Hama, and Lissa James, who you guys may have seen in that the Climate Change Coalition video yesterday, she said that they had just they use the wild stuff that's on the tide flats out there for cooking, and she discovered that in the summertime when the stuff is pretty grainy from spawn, that you can just cover it in pimento cheese and cook it, and you can't tell. So we're in the South. We have lots of fucking pimento cheese. right? So yeah, there's a good one for that. There's a very good reason why I chose Garrett and Connor, because they're from two different growing locations, but also just like the culture of growing in Florida is very different from North Carolina. Connor, can you process and tag your own oysters?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. And Garrett, do you process and tag yours?
No, we drop ours off to the processor.
Okay, gotcha. So I'm not trying to get in your pockets either, Tim. I promise. I'm trying to make this work for everybody. No, I really do. What I would like to see is that what I really don't want to see happen is for farmers to feel like there's no incentive in growing a perfect oyster. But because the demand is so crazy, and I probably should have you up here. If you want to come sit down, feel free. Because the demand for oysters is so crazy, I mean, you can market this stuff that's suboptimal as whatever, and people are still just buy it. They'll buy anything. And I think that that's great for now. I mean, my concern is that, long term, what does that do to the reputation we're trying to build for ourselves? And it may do nothing. It may just be me worrying about shit that I can't control for no reason. But yeah, I mean, I want people to feel like they're being rewarded, like emotionally, for growing great oysters. So, from your perspective, and maybe we can take you a mic. Would it be something that is there any potential to purchase oysters that farmers are harvesting that they think is like a B grade for a lower price point, so that you can sell that along at a lower price point, so that the restaurants can actually approach those in a way where they can offer a dish that has some perceived value? Because from my end, that's the struggle. If I'm buying something that is farmed and paying 80 cents for it, and it's a B grade, but I want to use it on a dish, it's just gonna, for us to put enough material on a plate to make it, for it to have any value perception, that gets tricky for us, and how our guests look at what we're charging for food.
What we try to do is we try to promote our farmers to have labels of their own, where I think I said that yesterday, they're proud of what they grow. And and we try to get all the feedback we can. If somebody says, well, we don't need any more of these oysters this week, usually it's our distributor, Evans, or we have another local distributor. Or we also sell some retail to just local folks, and they like a bigger oyster than most of y'all like. And on the coast, they're just spoiled, and not necessarily, they're not as pretty usually when they get that big. And so most of our growers try to grow a 3-2-1, 3 inches long, 2 inches wide, and 1 inch deep. And some of them will try to push it a little bit. Like right now, they're real hungry because of the storm, and we'll get in a load that may not be quite ready. And usually we try to send those back and tell them, put them back in the water for another 3 or 4 weeks, and they do it, and they understand, and they usually don't do that again because the cost and the loss of revenue from doing that. But so we try to keep our quality of the place where we don't have a B market as far as what we ship. So, but sometimes your eye doesn't meet it completely, or somebody will have a new grader that isn't quite as good at determining what's market ready and what's not, so those are our criteria. But hopefully we ship out stuff that's meets y'all's satisfaction, and we sure like to hear if it doesn't, and why, and we'll talk to those growers.
Yeah, totally. Like I said,
we appreciate the feedback.
I'm just trying to see if there's like a way for these guys to come up with an outlet so that they are able to find a home for that stuff. And still protect the reputation of the industry and all that stuff.
And a lot of that, we have local restaurants that if they let it grow a little longer, they'll take that and be very happy with it.
Okay.
And they being closer, they don't pay quite as much for it. but we still pay the growers the same amount. We have a set amount for the growers, and try to keep that equal, but we'd rather bring them up to justify what we're paying them than to lower their price.
Gaia.
So.
No, I understand.
And
It's there's like four different industries trying to make it all work for a
Right,
buck or less. So,
right.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
it is tricky. So, what stage is your lease at right now, Garrett? Are you harvesting stuff at the moment, or and the follow up is what percentage would you say you're at right now of stuff that's like you would like grade as a B?
Right now we are. I think our last harvest was back in beginning of January. Then we harvested some stuff for the Oyster Festival, the Panacea Oyster Festival, beginning of February. But right now we have a lot that will be ready in like 3 weeks. Okay. But it's tough.
Yeah, you won't know until you're in there.
Yeah, we won't know until we're actually going through them again. But a lot were long enough. But they just didn't have the right density. I'm real picky about what we send out. In the beginning, it was like this whole ordeal where we'd have thousands of oysters, and I'm like, well, we can't send those out. And so finally, an avenue opened up, and we were able to offload all those. And they would take them 5,000 at a time, which really helped. But that's hit or miss. So.
Gotcha. What about you, Connor? Do you have a reliable outlet? I mean, do you and Chef Jake have a relationship where you can? And I might be developing one or damaging one right now. It's hard to say just yet. What's your go-to for these donkey dicks?
So Jake and I were actually talking about a few recipes that maybe I would bring him some funkier shaped oysters and he could implement them over this week. And I don't think it's far off as long as you can hit the right price point with the right chef. I normally don't bring them to Pinpoint because they are looking for nice oysters on the half shell. And I think that we do have the control over this, kind of like you're saying. And it's not necessarily up to, it doesn't have to be the distributor. It can be the grower. Like you said, we're all really hardcore on what we send out to product. And if you're putting stuff to the side that probably has the meat and probably has the shape, then maybe you should call it something else and send it for a $10 less a bag. It's going to give you space, and more likely than not, it's probably not going to get that much better over time.
Yeah.
So
if you worked with a processor, would you be like, hey, Mr. Super Nice Processor that takes great care of me, I have this B grade stuff. Could you pass this on for a few cents less?
Yeah. Judd from Wrightsville Beach Brewery is a processor for wild oysters and for cultured oysters, and he enjoys a larger oyster, and they fight wild oysters to get in and open them up every day. So I've asked him multiple times, like, hey, these are bigger, might be harder to get into, but that's what he wants. He'll pay close to same price as everything else as long as it fits what he wants. So it's just finding the right person for the right place. And it's even cooler if you have that one restaurant in town. It's like everybody's got Divine Pines, but all those are hanging to the left or something like that. I don't know. If you're that big of a fan, maybe you want to see it.
Some of our growers will take their less desirable oysters to another distributor, and I'm not going to mention any names, but they take them. They're less particular, and they're, pardon? No, I wouldn't do that, but it's quite a ways away, so it costs them money to do that, and they have to clean their own too. So I don't know. It's kind of a toss-up for them.
Can I ask a question about it? I think one thing, we've got a lot of growers that want to grow more oysters. We see Virginia wants to grow more oysters, and everyone's worried about market collapse. And so the way around that is, we have to have good branding and good quality. We need more consumers. We want people to eat more raw oysters, and that's great. We've got people at raw bars in Nashville that are eating a lot of raw oysters that didn't. But I would say, you all know it. Anybody who's been at a raw bar, you've seen that look of somebody who comes up to the raw bar. There's the person who's thrilled that you have raw oysters, and there's the spouse next to him who's like, I can't believe they put that in their mouth, and I kissed that person, right? Like, you get that there are people who will not eat raw oysters, and I think we're missing something if we're not embracing this idea of cooked oysters. The counterpoint is, I think in New Orleans we got good with our cuisine at burying oysters because we were getting a lot of really crummy oysters to market. So we were good at cheese and bacon, and that makes anything taste good. I think like if you guys were at the Shuck and Tell last night, by the way, Connor looked like he was in a prison lineup up there. I gotta say, he looked about as comfortable as being in a prison lineup. But Connor served an amazing oyster last night. It was a big oyster, but you grilled it, and it's a great presentation. And I would say maybe not even having just these be your throwaways. Maybe you have a crop that you're putting less labor into and you accept you're trying to get a big, meaty oyster. And I just wanted to see if you guys have thought about that, not being a reject pile, but being a second brand.
Yeah, I've had lots of conversations with a buddy who has a lease across the way, Ben Wiggins, and we're like, man, yeah, would be nice. Like, we get these oysters that they just grow a little longer than everything else, and just throw those off to the side and like don't worry about them and pick them up in 6 months and just sell them as like jumbos or something. And because especially in our area, south, like in the coastal Florida, everybody's like, man, how big are those oysters? Can you get me a 6-inch oyster? I'm like, oh, gracious. Yeah, I got some over here that forgot about like 3 months ago, but yeah.
So yeah, I think what I'm kind of in a very long roundabout way getting at is, and I hope that Jake and Julia shared this, but I know from our restaurant perspective, we want the B grade oysters. We would obviously like to be able to get a price on it that gives us an opportunity to actually make a full dish with it, because that's the hard part for us, is that especially if it's not an oyster that's already on the bigger side, if it's just something that's maybe even stunted, but you don't want to necessarily call it a boondock or a divine pine, where's the home for that? And if we have to relegate it to some sort of cooked or preserved dish, we've got to figure out how to make that food that's actually food that's maybe even dinner, but it's also not like, the cost of a dozen oysters in a raw bar. It's $36 for an oyster dish. I don't know. Do I want to do that? Maybe not. But yeah, so the reason why I handed you this, Mike, is because I love that you always use your social media to post about health and ecological and environmental benefits of the oyster industry. Can you just refresh just the copy on that one that you did either yesterday or the day before? Do you remember? You've forgotten. Do you want me to get my phone out?
If Americans replace 10% of their meat consumption with oysters, it'd be the equivalent of taking 11 million cars off the road. Is that the one?
Yeah. That's what
Something
I'm talking
like that.
about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the bottom line here is that, oysters are great, and I've loved my experience serving them on both of our restaurants' raw bars. It's led me to a lot of awesome places. Mm-hmm. But oysters have to be more than just an expensive snack at a fancy restaurant. They've got to be dinner. So that's what I'm trying to, and Bill's suggestion, I think, is probably one that hopefully has legs. I know that this industry in general is young, and people are still just trying to figure out how to make it work, period. So they're not necessarily looking at ways to grow less margin yielding product already. But yeah, there's a home for it, and we can use it. And if you can figure out a way to take some of your touches and some of your labor out of it so that your margins are the same, then just send it to us. We want to cook it. What's your question?
Well, just to kind of say what we do with our uglies. We're not as creative with the naming as NC, but
can you have a name for him? Can you give one?
What we just call ours. Yeah. All right. We'll
dump them out, bro.
Yeah. We'll share some pictures. I'll send you some pictures of my kids. But the one thing we got to realize too, that the meat on the inside, if you're growing triploids, you still have an awesome meat on the inside. And like Bill alluded to, New Orleans is huge on the char-grilled market. And in the summertime, when all of these bottom oysters are extremely thin, once you put that on a searing fire, like there's nothing left. So I save up a lot of my ugly ones and sell them to the chefs that I deal with in the summertime, and their char-grilled blows everybody else away because they have these fat oysters.
Yep, and the other thing I think, Scott, is you don't bury it.
you've got a great oyster. It's not muddy, it's a fat, sweet meat, and it's a great presentation. If you don't bury it, like you can still let that oyster shine like you guys did last night, Connor. You could still taste that oyster. It just had an amazing sauce on top of it. Right. It wasn't buried. And I think that's a big difference. You're not trying to hide something. You're trying to, and that's what chefs are good at. You're not trying to hide something. You're trying to accentuate something.
So Franz actually grows those oysters, and he's super close. He's like 5 miles away from me. Refrigerators are expensive, tumblers are expensive, blah, blah, blah. And I love to sell oysters, so it was a fun task to be able to try to sell his oysters. So, but when we first started, like just to tell the whole thing behind it, when we first started me selling his oysters, he was trying to sell petites from Stump Sound. Like there are a lot of farmers behind Topsail Sound now, a lot with the same name, Stump Sound. And a lot of us are all trying to grow petites. So it was like, can I find somebody to bite on this? Like, and who and when. And then eventually the oysters just kept beautiful, like so beautiful, perfect symmetry, deep cup every time, and they just were bigger. So it turned into like, I'm looking through these menus like that y'all have, and 9 out of 10 times every cup on there says small, right? Like, so if your menu says small cups and you have consumers that are showing up for a 6 to 7 inch oyster, then having some variety on the menu is what this whole conversation has kind of been about.
We've only had one guy in 6 years show up for those, and he threw up outside.
There's a guy at my boat ramp named Frank, and he will take that challenge.
Yeah. So Julia, question. How are we supposed to, not just like you as a chef, how am I like a guy with mediocre knife skills and a bratty 3-year-old supposed to make oysters for dinner? What do I do?
Well, one thing I want to say before that is just that we were talking earlier about how sometimes produce farmers will market, like during tomato season, they have so many tomatoes all of a sudden, and so they'll market seconds for things that are bruised or they've been sitting around a little bit longer or what have you. And we're able to look at that and look at the price and say, okay, we'll take 6 cases of that and we'll make a bunch of sauce and we'll can it for later in the year or preserve it or what have you. And Bryan and I were talking about that at lunch because I think it is actually a good comparison to where like our restaurant, our oyster bar at this point are kind of a machine. And we know we have, X amount of diners coming in, and especially during happy hour, we have a certain window that we need to sell a certain amount. And what kind of throws a wrench in your plans is if you're getting all your oysters delivered Monday through Friday and you order a certain amount for the weekend, and then you have 3 or 4 cases that, every other one the shucker is busting through and it's going in the trash. It screws up your inventory, it screws up your food costs for the whole weekend. And so I think if you were able to market those B grade or those larger ones that aren't perfect for the oyster bar or whatever, and we knew that when we were purchasing them, so we could plan to put them on our menu for that weekend, versus just having like a plan for the weekend and then all of a sudden it's thrown off a little bit. So I think it is about transparency, it is about marketing, it is about saying like, hey, we do have this and the meat is really wonderful. It might not be the best thing for your raw bar, but could you think about putting it on your menu? It's when our like, we have an 8 by 8 foot walk-in for a 130 seat restaurant. And if about 25% of that walk-in is taken up by cases of oysters, you better believe like we're counting on shucking every single one. So I think it's when our plan gets thrown off. But again, if we know about what we're purchasing, it's just like a bruised tomato. We can account for it and preserve it or cook it however.
Additionally, Julie, I see you in the back. What are those B grade oysters for? Shucking practice. Because, God knows if there's one thing in the world that we need more of is people who give a shit about opening oysters so that they look good.
Right. Well, but to your point about the cost per dish, yes, if we are buying an 85-cent oyster and then we're selling it for $2.50 or $3, if you think about all of a sudden, like one thing we've done seasonally is oyster stew. Well, nobody wants to sit down at a restaurant and pay $15 for oyster stew that only has 3 oysters in it.
Correct.
Because otherwise it's going to cost more than $15. So I think that's the point is that you're trying to get to maybe is in order to be able to put a stew, a fritter, or something that really for the customer to want, it has enough oyster in it to like make like the menu description valid.
Yeah. It's
got to be at a price point where we can afford to put more than 3 in one plate.
Yeah, I feel you. Have you ever tried to serve gooey duck? You can have like a morsel of a gooey duck in the dish, and that's all you can afford.
Yeah,
Um,
basically.
Jake, what about you? I mean, what's your take on just garden variety oyster community if we're out making suggestions to people for home use too? I mean, I think this is something that you're going to have to see more down the line. Is I think we still rely on restaurants to sell almost all of these oysters that you guys are growing, and at some point in time, we've got to lean on the general public to take some home and to use them as well. So if you're talking to somebody who's just like, what do I do with these oysters? How do I work with this at home without it being, something that's like out of the Southern Living Cookbook from 1982?
Again, I'm going on the stew thing. Again, using up, not prime ingredients. I get a lot of local fish in too, and try to use up every bit of that fish. Some of the head meat and everything. So I usually incorporate that sort of like in a chowder, and sort of put other ingredients in there, but also showcase that oyster. But as a, home cook, if you're not that good at shucking, you could always do a light steam, throw them on the grill, and then take them off right when they open, and then shuck them, and then you can have any different types of uses. You could do sort of like a dirty rice. Instead of using chicken liver, you could use oysters, and multiple different uses, or you could just plain out saute them into vegetables. It's multiple different uses you could do, and you never know if it's going to work until you try it.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Oysters for dinner. I think that's going to be my new mantra. I hope that you guys have some questions for the people here to my right.
Yeah, Brian, I'm here. I'm on the restaurant side also, like you, and on the oyster farm. As Rusty said yesterday, I've been open for 4 days since December 27th. And my oysters were medium, and I, as a good oyster farmer, we allocate how much we sell per week. Well, now oysters been in the water for 3 months, and I haven't sold hardly anything. And as Bill can attest to, as a good extension agent, he came out to the farm when we harvest, and we almost killed him because he was picking up these full bags of oysters. So now I need to have an alternative method of how I'm going to sell these oysters, because I always sold a nice, plump, medium oyster. Well, now they're 3 months later, they're large. What am I going to do? And as you said, with the triploids, when you do cook them or bake them, they stand up. Every oyster I've been eating all my life, when you bake it, char-grill it, it shrinks up. Our triploid oysters stay big and plump, which I think is a good idea. So appreciate you guys having this panel today, because it's giving me ideas of how I'm going to market my oysters when I can open back up and sell again.
Well, Alabama oysters are a damn fine grilling oyster, so you got that advantage. Steve.
So for your cooked dishes, why can't you use shucked oysters by the gallon?
You can, but I mean, shucked oysters also are not necessarily always available, and that's not necessarily the industry that I'm trying to support. I'm trying to support oyster farmers, not oyster pickers.
One more. Talk to me about Salinity.
What would you like to know about that?
Do customers care?
On the raw bar, definitely. I mean, if we're just trying to prepare something, you don't have to worry about that. We'll figure it out. But yeah, and at the raw bar, people care a lot about salinity, and it's typically just because. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's crazy. It's been really interesting because at Kimball House, where we have oysters from all over the place, they typically want stuff that is just like full blown in the red salinity. And at Watchman's, I mean, the stuff that's at the top of the menu that is the lowest salinity, people have really taken. I mean, it's almost just like it's the opposite effect. People fall in love with the stuff that's like 10 to 15. So I think that there's something for everybody, but it just kind of depends on what kind of eater you are. But one way or the other, they either want it low or they want it high. But there's definitely I've noticed, especially in the last like 2 years, we're seeing a greater mixture other than people just saying what's your saltiest oyster. And I think it's a lot of times it's because people are figuring out that there is a range of salinity. That was one of the common mistakes I felt like on our guests at Kimball House when we opened, is that they would say, I want the saltiest oyster you got. I like oysters from Louisiana. I'm like, that's probably not the saltiest oyster you're going to find in the world. So, you know, there's that. What was your question, Steve? Do people care about salinity? Yes.
Our customers definitely do, but I do think it's interesting. Like you said, it goes in both directions. So because we have such a diverse clientele that likes oysters from all over the country, there's going to be people who want both. I like saltier ones.
I definitely think a wide variety of your oysters are good to have on your menu to also to get new people trying those oysters, because I think, you know, either West Coast or the not so salty oysters are always a good beginner oyster for somebody, and that's how you get them and then get them to come back and get more oysters.
Oh, yeah, and now we can use farmed Gulf oysters instead of Eau Soleils to get people.
Definitely.
What other questions?
Well, I just got more of a comment, and that is that up north, pretty much everybody recognizes you're going to have a bunch of oysters that are ugly, and you have a B grade. And don't sell them under your trademark brand, because you don't want to trash your trademark. Have another brand name that you sell them under. And one of the things that I found, though, is that the wholesalers sell them for the full price. Just and so you're not seeing the discount. So that's frustrating to me, because I go out there, everybody's charging full price for them. So.
I mean, this is as much for growers as the buyers. We do have some oysters that, of course, like everybody else, kind of gets out of hand. They're the fastest growers, but there's not enough quantity to truly sell. We put them off to the side. My advice to growers, let the local people around you know that you've got oysters. And if you've got the dealer's license to sell directly to the public, you soon won't have enough large oysters to worry about selling them to restaurants. I mean, where we're at here just up the coast, the local people that have eaten oysters all their life, they want oysters as big as you can grow them. They literally come, give me the biggest oyster you've got. We're selling 100-count bags that are shucking out at over a gallon. I mean, they are huge, size of your hand oysters. These local people love them. Any ones I have are gone. And so if you just keep that in the back of your mind, if you do have your dealer's license, let the local people know around you, because a lot of them are oyster eaters all their life, and they want those larger oysters. The other thing that I've noticed throughout the years at times is the opposite direction. It's almost like at times we're in a race to the bottom to sell the smallest oyster we physically can. And you know, I go to a raw bar and look because I'm looking to see what everybody else is selling, and when I see an oyster that is literally sub 2 inches selling, and it's not an Austria, it's a Virginica, but it's as big as your thumb, and charging $3 a piece for it and getting it, whereas me, I'm selling at 3 inches minimum because I like that nice size oyster. I don't know where the drive is. Is it on the market side? Is it the grower side? Is it the wholesaler side that's pushing the shorter, smaller oysters? But I don't know that we're doing that good to sell as small as we can.
Yeah, I think that, Jay, there's got to be a little bit of, it's probably a little bit of both. I think that definitely the metropolitan demographics like the petite stuff, but I think with as much mortality as people have been suffering, there's some urgency to sell stuff as soon as they can. So I think that it's coming from both sides. Right. Yeah. I think what's our
We probably should move on. We got to wrap.
Sorry, Clay.